all based just on these pages.
Exactly. Getting a clear picture of how they frame it.
So let's just dive right in. How does this source material actually define divine humanism, like at its core?
Okay, so the PDF basically frames it as a view where humans are, well, conscious beings, but their existence is fundamentally shaped by divine intent.
Divine intent, okay.
And a really crucial element right from the start is that humans have free will, but it's limited free will.
Limited will. That already feels kind of different from how maybe we often think about freedom today.
That's a massive distinction for this source, yeah. It positions humans as, like, unique representatives, vice-agents of God on Earth.
Okay.
So they have conscious thought, they can make choices, volitional choices, but it's all within this larger, divinely ordained system.
And you mentioned the distinction that the source makes a really strong contrast with what it terms secular humanism.
Oh, absolutely. It couldn't be clearer. The material basically says, unlike secular humanism, divine humanism insists that belief in the creator isn't just one aspect of human worth. It's the absolute foundation of it.
The foundation.
Right. And without that connection, the source claims human reasoning becomes, well, it uses the term soulless intellect.
Soulless intellect. Wow.
Yeah, and it goes on to say that this kind of intellect is doomed to destruction.
Okay, doomed to destruction. That's a pretty heavy statement. It implies that not having this belief isn't just like a different opinion, but something fundamentally damaging, according to the source.
That's precisely how it's presented. And, that leads directly into another really core idea the source unpacks.
Right.
The whole concept of partial will versus absolute will.
Partial will. That's us, our will.
Yes, exactly. The human capacity to choose. But the source is really careful to stress this isn't unlimited power. It's not complete freedom.
Yep.
It's described as a restricted capacity for choice within an infinite system. That's our partial will.
Restricted capacity. Okay, so then absolute will.
That belongs only to God. It's the sovereign will governing everything, the universe, time, destiny. It directs all creation.
Right.
And here's where it gets really interesting, I think. The source asserts that this absolute will never contradicts human choices, for what the human chooses is already known to God.
Whoa, hold on. So even our limited choices, from this viewpoint, they're already known, already accounted for within God's infinite will. That's a lot to process.
It is definitely complex, and the source leans into that. It argues that real freedom, true freedom, isn't this illusion of just unlimited choice,
right,
but actually living in connection with one's Lord. It uses an analogy like a phone needing internet to work properly.
Ah, okay. Like you need that fundamental link to the network, the source, to function fully within the bigger picture.
Exactly that. And the material suggests it's through this connection that divine power can actually manifest, even through what seems like our own human weakness or frailty.
The source also talks about this partial will not being random, but a conscious gift.
Right, a gift from, boundless power. It emphasizes that this ability to choose, to understand, to feel, even to bear consequences, it's all intentionally given. Even the ability to tell right from wrong is seen as bestowed. And choosing good, the source suggests, is more than just morals. It's like a subconscious nod back to the creator within us.
There's that analogy in the text comparing the human to a paintbrush.
Yeah, a brush handed to the painter god for just a moment. And the idea is that this temporary holding of the brush, this capacity for choice, it elevates human dignity. It shows our place in the grand design. True beauty, the source suggests, is drawing your own line with that brush, but never forgetting whose hand it truly belongs to.
That image really pulls together the limited will and the divine connection ideas. And then there's that statement about faith itself.
Oh, yeah. That it's not born of freedom, but of need.
The needy.
A fundamental, inescapable human need, according to this source. A need for meaning, for connection. And this idea that this need is being suppressed today leads right into their critique of the modern world.
Okay, so the source sees this seeking a creator as like a historical constant, a universal necessity.
Pretty much, yeah. But it argues the modern age is actively working against fulfilling that need.
How so?
It claims it uses things like information pollution, counterfeit philosophies, and so-called humanism as weapons, essentially overwhelming people or misleading them so they don't even look for deeper truth, maybe because they fear what it demands.
And this leads, paradoxically, to a famine of wisdom, despite all the information we have.
That's exactly the phrase used. It paints this picture of, a generation overloaded with data, but consuming it without real reflection, conditioned to sort of surrender before thinking, deny before believing.
Mhm.
And the danger, as they see it, is the mind weakens and the heart, well, it darkens or just goes numb.
The text also mentions demonic structures. What's
Ah.
that about?
It suggests their influence isn't always obvious, not like direct denial. It's more
Yeah.
subtle, invisible almost, luring people into indifference.
Indifference.
Yeah, the whisper isn't God's not real. It's more like, don't bother thinking about it. Just be indifferent. It's presented as this kind of spiritual apathy spreading.
There's a reference to the Quran here. Surah Ibrahim, verse 22.
Yes, it uses that verse about Satan on the Day of Judgment, saying, basically, look, I just invited you, you chose to follow. Blame yourselves. The source interprets this as the moment all the masks fall off the false intellectuals, the systems selling godlessness as freedom, showing their emptiness, and how they ultimately abandon those who followed them.
That's a pretty dark picture. Did the source offer any hope against this?
It does, actually. It makes the point that a truly reflective person, especially today with all the chaos and, well, meaninglessness, that person inevitably finds their Lord.
So reflection leads back.
In this view, yes. Belief, in this modern context, is actually framed as a powerful form of resistance against these dominant trends.
And if that sacred connection isn't reestablished, what's the consequence according to the source?
It describes a progression. The person becomes numb, then corrupted, and ultimately the source uses the word demonized.
Wow.
But reconnect, like getting back online with that internet analogy, it's presented as the way to fill that emptiness with peace, letting divine grace flow again.
The source also talks about a silent apocalypse. Not fire and brimstone, then.
No, not necessarily. It describes it as something that kind of crept in quietly through screens, consumerism, arrogance, through worshiping our own egos or maybe algorithms. The collapse, it argues, wasn't even noticed because it was maybe applauded or just met with apathy. Humanity got sort of buried in soullessness without realizing it.
And this connects to what it calls the deification of the individual.
Absolutely. The idea is that people started seeing their own choices, their own desires, as the ultimate truth, the ultimate law, forgetting where that ability to choose even came from.
Right.
So they drift away from the absolute will. And in this state, the source argues humans become just content, a tool for engagement, not beings with inherent purpose.
But there's still potential to stop this. Humanity has the will.
Yes, the source suggests we do have the will if we become aware of its true source and its proper place. It's not against tech or knowledge itself,
Okay.
but against intellect that's cut off from meaning, where the ego just takes over from the soul.
So the source then lists specific roots of this modern collapse. Can we walk through those?
Sure. It lays out four main areas. First, deification of the self.
Okay.
This is basically the attitude of, I'm everything, what I think want is paramount. It erases the line between, say, healthy self-worth and pride that ignores the sacred, leads to no boundaries, and confusing consumption, often pre-programmed choices with actual freedom.
Putting the self on a pedestal above all else.
Yeah.
Got it. What's second?
Second, meaninglessness of knowledge. The idea here is that knowledge used to be about seeking truth, but now it's often just for, well, vanity, influence, power, showing off. The internet is portrayed as a potential wasteland where information floods in without divine guidance or a framework for wisdom. People care more about knowing more than others rather than understanding or reflecting. Memorization over insight.
Knowledge just for knowledge's sake, or worse, for status, without real purpose. Okay, third.
Third, culture of consumption and pleasure. The source argues this has been actively pushed, especially since the early 1900s, encouraging us to live by impulse.
Right. It uses the phrase, thinking is heavy, shopping is swift. Kind of captures it, doesn't it? Leads to bloating, both physically and spiritually. We lose our inner chemistry, as the source puts it.
Prioritizing easy pleasure over anything substantial.
Yeah.
And the fourth point.
Fourth, moral erosion. Starting with the collapse of the family. The source sees the family as the traditional place where morality and virtue are learned. But it argues these have been undermined by ideologies, by media, by influencers. Morality became kind of a taboo subject in schools, maybe, and the screen ended up educating the heart instead of faith or family.
That's quite the diagnosis. A powerful critique, all stemming from losing that divine connection. So given all that, what does divine humanism, as the source presents it, offer as the way forward? What are its core principles?
Okay, so the source lays out several key principles. The first one is recognizing supremacy and encouraging thought.
It says the soul is shaped by divine wisdom, but importantly, the Creator actually encourages us to question, to contemplate, to reason. It points to Quranic verses like, will you not reflect? Or do you not think?
So thinking is actually part of faith here, not opposed to it.
Absolutely. According to the source, critical thought is essential to faith. Contemplation itself is seen as worship. To think is to worship with the intellect.
Interesting. What's the next principle?
Second is partial will, key to test of loyalty. Remember the limited free will. The source stresses that our ability to choose good or evil is the very thing that makes us morally responsible. This freedom, even though limited, is presented as a merciful gift. It uses that analogy again, like a teacher giving a student a pen. How you use it shows your character. So our will, when we align it with faith, becomes an act of loyalty to God.
So the very limitation is part of the test.
That's the idea. Third principle, nobility of humanity, servanthood and humility. The source points to how God is described with humility in the Quran, like using "we created." It argues that true human greatness isn't about self-aggrandizement, but about emulating that divine humility, striving for truth and service to God, not boosting the ego.
So dignity comes from service and humility, not independence.
Exactly. Fourth is moral values must be based on divine laws. This is pretty direct. Scripture, not social trends, not ideologies, not what I personally prefer, must be the guide for right and wrong.
Okay.
Law-giving, it states, belongs to Allah alone. Our duty is submission to those laws, proving our loyalty. True morality, in this view, is divine justice, not just human opinion.
An unchanging standard based on divine revelation. Makes sense in this context. What's fifth?
Fifth, knowledge and thought begin with divine name. It highlights the very first Quranic revelation. Read, but read in the name of your Lord.
Oh, right.
So knowledge isn't just raw facts. It needs to be kneaded with wisdom to find truth and meaning. This includes reading the signs in the universe, the cosmos. Knowledge that doesn't actually bring you closer to God is just mere data.
So knowledge needs that sacred context to be truly valuable.
Okay. Sixth principle, human model. Meaning, not consumption. This directly counters that critique of modern life we talked about.
Right.
The ideal human, in this view, seeks meaning, not just pleasure or stuff. It promotes values like patience, gratitude, contentment. And it makes the point. If you consume without knowing why, you end up serving the thing you're consuming. And a society that just consumes without producing real value, it argues, eats away at its own essence.
That's a clear response to the consumer culture critique. And the final principle.
The final one is recognizing the Creator, ultimate purpose. This ties it all together. The ultimate goal of being human, the source says, is to know and glorify the Creator.
The ultimate purpose.
Yeah. Life is seen as a journey towards that goal, knowing, loving, turning towards Allah. Servanthood is what gives existence its true meaning. Without knowing the Creator, a person is incomplete. Existence without that divine signature is ultimately meaningless.
So the whole structure rests on this foundation of recognizing and connecting with the divine.
It really does. And central to making that connection work, the source talks about the balance between the mind and the heart.
Okay, so it sees humans as having both, like an intellectual capacity and something more spiritual or emotional.
Exactly. The intellect is for analysis, logic, understanding how things work. But the heart in this framework is the center for meaning, for perceiving divine reality.
The source brings up a specific Quranic verse here, doesn't it? Surah Al-Araf, 179.
It does. The verse talks about beings with hearts with which they do not understand and compares them to cattle.
Okay.
The interpretation offered in the source is that this shows the heart actually has a role in reasoning, in understanding at a deeper level. It's the heart's perception, its ability to grasp meaning that makes us truly human, beyond just intellect.
And the source tries to connect this ancient idea to modern science.
Yeah, it mentions recent studies finding neural cells in the heart, suggesting it's more than a pump. It processes information, it's linked to memory. The source sees this as science, kind of catching up to what the Quran said 1,400 years ago. It even links it to the verse, "We are closer to the human than his jugular vein," suggesting that divine closeness is felt or established through the heart.
So the ideal is mind and heart working together, leading to wisdom.
That's the synthesis, yeah. Intellect alone, the source warns, can lead to arrogance. But intellect guided by the heart, by that deeper perception, leads to humility and true wisdom.
And if the heart isn't guiding the intellect?
The Source has a stark label for that. Knowledge without heart is demonic knowledge.
Demonic knowledge, okay.
It argues that secular systems might celebrate intellect, but often silence or ignore the heart. And a brilliant mind with a darkened heart, it suggests, mirrors the state of Iblis or Satan, who knew a lot but rejected servitude out of pride.
That really emphasizes the importance of that heart connection. So moving from mind and heart, the Source then gets into the philosophy of faith itself. It's described as obedience out of love.
Yeah, it's presented not just as believing something is true, but as a whole multi-layered journey toward truth. It outlines 3 stages, drawing on traditional Islamic thought.
Okay, what are those stages?
Stage 1 is recognizing through knowledge, ilm al-yaqin. This is the intellectual starting point, using your mind,
Right.
reflecting on the universe, on existence, concluding logically that there must be a creator, using reason, just like the Quran encourages. It's knowledge-based confirmation, tasdik. The Source calls it the first gate. Necessary, but it's not full submission or love yet.
So step 1,
Mm-hmm.
understand with the mind.
Okay. Step 2, bonding through the heart, ayn al-yaqin. This goes deeper than just knowing about God. It's about forming a real bond, seeing God as your Lord.
Personal connection.
Exactly. The heart gets involved, love starts to grow, you feel that connection, that emotional resonance. The Source mentions Quranic descriptions of hearts trembling when God is mentioned. This leads to worship prayer, maybe weeping out of awe, prostration. But even this, the Source says, isn't the final stage of surrender.
Knowing with the mind, bonding with the heart. What's the final stage?
Stage 3, submitting with love. Aqwa yakin. This is the highest level where knowledge, love, and submission all come together.
Yeah.
Faith becomes the absolute core of your life, the reason you breathe. God isn't just known and loved. God is the purpose of your existence. Worship isn't about fearing hell. It's about pure adoration.
Wow.
Prostrating out of love, praying for that piece of being connected. The Source describes the soul state as like saying, if you are pleased with me, even hell would be paradise. Or you are my only goal, I seek only you. It's called muhabbatullah, being bound by love. It echoes the Prophet Muhammad saying, you don't truly believe until God is more beloved than family, wealth, even yourself.
That's a profound journey described there, from intellectual ascent to complete loving devotion.
It is. And the philosophical takeaway the Source offers is that this journey of faith isn't about losing freedom. It's about returning to the fundamental truth of our existence and accepting the responsibility, the trust that comes with our limited will. The believer purifies the mind, opens the heart, and entrusts their will.
Right.
And the ultimate expression, it says, isn't bowing out of fear, but bowing out of sheer awe.
Which really loops back to how this whole thing started divine humanism as a form of resistance.
Exactly. The Source explicitly frames it that way right at the end, a silent resistance against putting a godless human at the center of everything. It's a call to servanthood, a movement of humility against what it sees as modern arrogance.
And that core contrast with secular humanism is right there again.
Absolutely. Secular humanism says man is man. Divine humanism, according to the Source, replies, man becomes truly human only when they turn to God.
So just to recap the critique, what does the Source see as the failures of secular humanism?
It argues that by putting humans first, but cutting them off from their creator, from the actual center of creation, secular humanism leads inevitably to meaninglessness, chaos. It claims it killed the heart, crushed human nature. Morality becomes relative, based on whims or social pressure, accountable only to ourselves, which the Source calls invisible chains.
And the answer from divine humanism is?
The answer is that true humanity is found in serving Allah. Our value comes from being created. Our will is a sacred trust. Our freedom is a test. Our greatness is found in humility, in prostration.
Right.
It doesn't reject reason or knowledge, but insists they must be connected to the heart, to wisdom. It defends human rights, aklareb, but says they can't override God's rights, aklala. The human is a sacred trust, brought to life by the Creator's breath.
So it's not just putting forward a different idea. It's positioned as actively resisting systems that, in its view, distort what it means to be human.
That's exactly the final message. It's a call to action, almost. If you can still think critically, if your heart still feels that spiritual pull, if you can still humble yourself, then you are resisting these trends. And the end of that path, the Source concludes, is only the Lord.
Divine humanism, then, as laid out in this material, is presented as, well, almost like a prayer. A callback to our innate nature, offered through writing, thinking, and that act of prostration.
It's a whole worldview built squarely on belief in the Creator and understanding our specific place, dignified yet dependent within that reality.
So we've journeyed through this source material, unpacking divine humanism's definition, its ideas on will and faith, its really strong critique of modernity, and its core principles, all based just on these excerpts.
Yeah, we've seen how it sets itself apart from secular humanism and frames itself as this resistance movement grounded in that sacred human-divine connection.
Thinking about that critique, the focus on consumption over meaning, intellect without heart, and the idea that true service comes from awe, not just fear. Maybe think about this, for you listening. Where in your own life, maybe totally outside any religious context, have you felt a sense of purpose or connection that just felt profound? Like fundamentally right, going beyond just usefulness or logic or what you simply preferred. Could exploring that feeling point towards what this source might call a deeper reality or connection?
Definitely something to mull over.
It certainly is. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.